So this morning I'm going to be speaking from Acts chapter 24. We're almost there. We're almost towards the end of it. I'll read it's chapter 24, the whole of 24 to verse 25, verse 12. And it's Paul's trial before Felix. 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus, and they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. "We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to weary you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and even tried to desecrate the temple, so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about these charges we are bringing against him." The other Jews joined in the accusation, asserting that these things were true. When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you have been a judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went up to the Jerusalem temple to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple, or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues, or anywhere else in the city. They cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today." Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. "When Lysias, the commander, comes," he said, "I will decide your case." He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you." At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant a favour to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against God. They requested Festus as a favour to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing to ambush him and to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." After spending 8 or 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defence. I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law, or against the temple, or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favour, said to Paul, Are you willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any of the wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, You have appealed to Caesar you will go. Now, some of us may have been watching the drama Line of Duty over the last few years, and this highly regarded drama twists and turns with different characters being accused, sometimes falsely, of crimes or misdemeanours, and it's up to the main characters to solve whether the accused did it or not. And the falsely accused plotline is a common one used in fiction, where the heroines or the heroes have been falsely accused of a crime they did not commit, and usually their innocence is proved just in the nick of time. In real life, you may find examples of when you yourself have been accused of something that you did not do. And here in this chapter we come to Paul's trial before the Roman governor Felix, and from the start that we know that Paul is not going to get a fair trial. Felix occupies the same position as Pontius Pilate and is described in one commentary as a cruel and despotic leader. Maybe it was part of the job description. In chapter 23, we saw Paul being taken to Caesarea under heavy Roman guard. When the Roman commander Claudius Lysias found out about the conspiracy of 40 men to murder Paul, a Roman citizen whom it was responsible for him to protect, he acted wisely and moved him to a more secure location. Lysias had already taken Paul before the Sanhedrin and had determined by their response that the accusations were regarding questions about Jewish law, but there was no accusation deserving death or even imprisonment. Paul was held in custody at Herod's Praetorium, a complex of buildings that had been constructed by Herod the Great and now served in several capacities, including the governor's residence. On the basis of Lysias' letter and Paul's Roman citizenship, Felix the governor should have and could have had Paul freed when he arrived. But instead, he kept Paul under guard, and while he waited for the Jews to come and make their accusations. This would become a series of Roman trials that would give Paul the opportunity to present the gospel to the most powerful people in that region, and eventually to Caesar himself. And the courtroom drama, which is another well-known trope used in television and film, is the setting for this chapter. Tertullus, the prosecuting lawyer, is a real sycophant to the governor when he uses the words, "We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation, everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix. We acknowledge this with profound gratitude." So Tertullus's introduction may seem like those Jews loved Felix and thought he was doing a superb job as governor. The truth was that he hated them. They hated him, and they despised his rule. So you can add hypocrite to the character resume. And what's said in Proverbs 26:24, "Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they labour deceit." And once Tertullus has buttered up the governor with flattery, he starts his case with false accusations about Paul, suggesting that they found him to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots with the Jews all over the world, and a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. And of course, Jesus was brought up in the town of Nazareth, so this is the only passage of Scripture where Jesus' followers are referred to as the Nazarene sect. And in the Hebrew and Arabic languages, the word for Christian is Nazarene. Tertullus is using the charge of troublemaker as an insult to Paul, And he twists the truth of the situation too, saying that Paul had been seized by Jews in accordance with the law. But then Lysias, the Roman commander, had snatched Paul from their custody with much force. But in truth, the Jews had almost murdered Paul, and it was only the arrival of the Roman soldiers that had prevented them from killing him. It reminds me of a quote. The very powerful, the very stupid have one thing in common. They don't alter their views to fit the facts. They alter the facts to fit their views, which can be uncomfortable if you're one of the facts they're trying to alter. And Paul is one of those facts that they're trying to alter, or at the very least, or at the most to get rid of. So his defence, in verse 10 onwards, is very specific. He deals with the specific allegations, denying what is not true and admitting what it is true. He freely admits to being a follower of Jesus. He clarifies what happened in his hearing before the Sanhedrin, and sometimes it's helpful to establish what the facts actually are. We're told that Felix was well acquainted with the way, which unfortunately doesn't mean that he was a Christian himself. But as he'd been a governor for 6 years up to that point, he was familiar enough to know that the Nazarene sect, these Christians, would have been proven to have had peaceful lifestyles and not the sort of group to start riots. And I have to say that Christians today, looking at them in this room, I can't imagine you lot starting any riots. Oh, hang on, there's dissension in the ranks there. In one translation, instead of the word troublemaker, it uses the word pest to tell us his charges that Paul is like a plague spreading dissension throughout the Roman Empire. There had been unrest in the preceding years in some of the large Jewish communities in the empire, including Alexandria and Rome itself. But these were places that Paul had never been to, and so therefore should have been meaningless. But the intention is to insinuate that Paul is the reason for them, and that therefore he should be destroyed or at least isolated before he causes more problems. And when it comes to his turn to speak, Paul has a watertight defence of the gospel. Not only can he tell Felix that his accusers cannot prove the charges they're now making against him, but he shows the conviction of his belief in his defence. He tells the court that he does indeed worship the God of their ancestors. He believes in everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. In short, he believes in the scriptures. Rather than denigrating Tertullus and the Jewish leaders, Paul openly declares that he shares the same hope in God as them. He shows compassion and a kindred spirit towards them, not anger. He says that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. He points to his clear conscience and his gifts for the poor and his innocence. Did you know that, according to one of the commentaries I've been reading, one of the reasons Luke wrote his Gospel and the book of Acts was as a record of all the false charges that the early Christians had been accused of? Luke wanted to show that Christians like Paul had not committed any of those crimes that they'd been accused of, and in such situations as these, and in others, such as in Acts 16 and 17. When Christians have been brought into court accused of causing disturbances, trying to stir up rebellion against the Roman Empire, no one can actually prove that they've been guilty in breaking any Roman law. If you look back in Acts chapter 18, verses 14 to 15, Gallio, the proconsul in Ephesus, says, "If you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanour or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourself. I will not be a judge of such things." And of course, in his book, Luke wrote these words. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and I have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he has sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death." These were dark times in Paul's life, yet he constantly turned to his faith in God to help him, even when it seemed impossible. Paul would take advantage of any opportunity to proclaim his hope, his confident assurances in God's promises. Here Paul refuted his accusers, but he demonstrated his own godly character and was even able to bring up the central issue of the resurrection of the dead, which is a key aspect of the gospel. Everywhere Paul went, he shone the light of the gospel, but not everyone could see it. In 2 Corinthians 4, he wrote, "The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel or the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." Felix was not necessarily evil, but he was weak, he was indecisive, and he was politically and financially motivated. He was corrupt and would have released Paul had he received some sort of financial incentive. He did not want to condemn an innocent man, but he did not have the courage to set him free. When Paul begins to speak of righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come, Felix gets uneasy and shouts, "Enough, enough." He may have been aware of the way of God, but he certainly didn't follow it, and Paul's words were enough to make him uncomfortable about his own sinful nature. And sometimes that can be true of all of us. Last week, I shared what the love of God is like, if you remember from my children's bedtime book. But this time, I'm going to share you what the love of God isn't like. It's not like a magic wand. It's not some spiritual sonic screwdriver that with one buzz will magically make our lives easy and peaceful. God's love, like the love of any parent, isn't going to just brush aside any wrongdoing or sin. There will be times when we feel convicted, like Felix, of the sin in our lives. And we cannot afford to brush it off and say, "Enough." 2 Corinthians 6, verse 2. "I tell you, now is the time of God's favour. Now is the time of salvation." Paul took every opportunity to shine the light of the gospel. Wherever he could, he spoke about his faith in Jesus Christ. His letters to the various churches show that. One of my readings this week was from 2 Corinthians 11, which was written about a year before Paul's trial in Caesarea. And I was struck by the sheer power of Paul's words as he defended his faith and ministry to those in Corinth who had been taken in by false teachers. And I wish to share that with you today. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have laboured and toiled, and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressures of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and the Father of the Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. It's unlikely that we will face trials as Paul did, but there may be many times when we face opposition, when we're frustrated by others' plans, and we may also be falsely accused of something. Paul spoke about the peace of God that transcends all understanding. God's perfect peace doesn't mean that we will never face any trials, but we must look to Paul as an example of how we should take every opportunity to shine the light of the gospel in the darkness. Then even in the dark places of our lives, help us to live in such a way as to know his perfect peace.